Okay, good morning everybody, and thank you very much for coming here today for this event about the continuing human rights crisis in Bahrain. Thank you very much to FIDH for organising this event. We'll be hearing from a few speakers this morning about the situation. My name is Dooley. I'm from Human Rights First, based in the US, and I'm also on the advisory board of the Gulf Center for Human Rights. After me, you'll hear from Michelle Forst, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, from Maitham Al-Samman from the Bahrain Center for Human Rights, and the President of FIDH, Dimitris Christopoulos. We'll take questions at the end, so if you could listen to the speakers first, then there'll be an opportunity at the end of that to ask your questions. First, I'd like to take a moment to reflect briefly on what's happened in Bahrain over the last 12 months or so. Clearly, the situation has become very serious since the uprising of 2011, but over the last 12 months or so, we've seen a fairly dramatic downturn in the human rights situation, with some very alarming indicators of how things have deteriorated. Leading human rights defenders over the last 12 months have either been forced into exile or trapped inside the country. We believe that there are several dozen human rights activists who are not allowed to leave the country, and some of those have been targeted in direct reprisal for their engagement with the United Nations and other international fora. You're going to hear later a bit more about the situation of the prominent human rights defender Nabil Rajab. But it's important to remember that one of the reasons that he's in jail is for a conviction around tweets he made, stating the truth that international organisations and journalists are not allowed into the country. This despite recorded testimony sent to the trial by Nick Kristof of the New York Times and myself, confirming that neither of us had been allowed into the country for several years. The judge ruled that that testimony was inadmissible. Another alarming thing we've seen in the last 12 months is really the effective banning of the political groups in Bahrain. In fact, the leader of the main opposition group, Al-Wafaq, Sheikh Ali Salman, is on trial this morning on further fabricated charges. Another of the leading opposition figures, Hassan Mushayma, remains in prison where he's been since 2011, and is one of those prisoners who is denied adequate medical care. We've also seen a new development in the last 12 months in Bahrain, where we've seen reprisals against families in Bahrain of activists based outside of Bahrain. This is something new we hadn't seen before, notably the family of Saeed Ahmed Al-Wadai. He's based in London, and because the authorities can't reach him in London, they have targeted members of his family on fabricated charges. One other thing that happened in 2017 is that the powers were restored to the notorious National Security Agency, the NSA. The NSA had powers stripped in 2011 following evidence of widespread abuse by its officials of detainees. Last year, those powers were restored, and sure enough, we've seen the NSA return back to its old practices of systematic torture in custody. 2017 also saw the resumption of military trials for civilians. And of course, executions are back now in Bahrain. 3 men were shot to death in January of last year, following an unfair trial. At the time, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Executions, Agnes Kalamard, described the deaths of the 3 after they had been convicted on flimsy evidence. She said that the killings amounted to extrajudicial executions. And a few weeks ago, on Christmas Day, a military court sentenced another 6 men to death after a sham mass trial. These men include Mohammed Al-Mutawi, an activist who's partnered with human rights organisations for some years, and the telecom engineer Saeed Alawi, who had been forcibly disappeared from his office in October 2016 and denied access to lawyers or his family. The sentencing of these 6 men on Christmas Day brings the number of prisoners on death row in Bahrain to a record 19. Now, while some of Bahrain's human rights crisis is not new, clearly civil society has been slowly suffocated for many years, and other leading human rights defenders have been in jail before 2017. These include Abdel Hadi Al-Khawaja and Naji Fatil. Things are getting dramatically worse over the last months and weeks. We saw 37 people arrested yesterday alone. Bahrain's clearly now sliding in a new and alarming direction. Its economy, it's on its knees, and its political life is taking its last gasps. Bahrain's instability is frightening for its population, for its allies, and for the region. We're going to hear first now from Michel Forst, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, about his concerns on Bahrain. Thank you.